The morning sun cast long shadows across the Naval Air Station, Fallen firing range, as Commander Jake, Reaper, Morrison watched another batch of recruits fumble through basic marksmanship. 23 years of special operations had taught him to spot weakness from a mile away, and today's crop looked particularly disappointing. The SEAL training pipeline was brutal for a reason: only the exceptional survived. Then she walked onto the range. Unremarkable at first glance, maybe 5'6" in worn desert boots, faded jeans, and a simple black tank top that had seen better days. Her auburn hair was pulled back in a practical ponytail, no makeup, no flash. She looked like any civilian contractor who might wander through the base, except for the way she carried herself. There was something in her gait, a controlled precision that made Morrison's instincts prickle. "Ma'am, civilians aren't authorized on this range during active training," Morrison called out, his voice carrying the authority of 2 decades in the teams. She turned, revealing sharp green eyes that held his gaze without flinching. "I'm not a civilian, Commander. Captain Lyra Ghost Kellerman, reporting for the evaluation you requested." Her voice was steady, professional, with just a hint of something Morrison couldn't place. Amusement, maybe. Morrison felt his eyebrows raise. The mysterious pilot everyone had been whispering about for weeks. The one with the classified record that made grown admirals go quiet. He'd expected someone more imposing. "You're the hotshot pilot, the one they're saying rewrote the book on combat aviation." One of his senior petty officers, Rodriguez, couldn't keep the skepticism from his voice. Captain Kellerman's lips curved in the faintest smile. "I don't know about rewriting books, petty officer, I just fly." She approached the firing line with casual confidence, accepting the M4 carbine offered by the range safety officer. As she checked the weapon, smooth, practiced movements that spoke of countless hours with firearms, Morrison found himself studying her more carefully. There was definitely more to this woman than met the eye. "Standard qual course?" she asked, settling into a comfortable shooting stance. "Unless you'd prefer something more challenging," Morrison replied, unable to resist the slight edge in his voice. That smile again. "Standard's fine, Commander. Sometimes the basics tell you everything you need to know." She raised the rifle, and Morrison noticed something that made his blood freeze. There, on her left shoulder, partially visible beneath the tank top's edge, was a tattoo. Not just any tattoo, a specific design he'd only seen once before, in a classified briefing about an operation that officially never happened. An operation where the impossible had become reality, and heroes had been born in the darkness above enemy territory. His hand unconsciously moved to his own chest, where beneath his uniform shirt lay an identical mark. The first shot rang out across the desert silence, and Morrison knew with absolute certainty that everything he thought he knew about Captain Lyra Kellerman was about to change forever. The woman standing before him wasn't just another pilot. She was a ghost returned from the dead. The morning had started like any other evaluation day at Naval Air Station Fallen, but Morrison's 23 years of experience told him it was about to become something extraordinary. Captain Kellerman's first shot had been a perfect center mass hit at 300 yards, impressive but not impossible. It was her second shot that made Morrison's pulse quicken. Without adjusting her stance or scope, she placed the round exactly 1 inch to the right of the first. Deliberate. Precise. A signature he'd seen before. "Interesting grouping pattern," Morrison observed, moving closer to the firing line. "Old habits," Kellerman replied, her voice carrying that same casual tone that somehow managed to convey volumes without saying anything at all. Rodriguez was setting up targets at increasingly difficult ranges, muttering under his breath about show-off pilots who thought they could outshoot SEALs. Morrison let him. The young petty officer would learn soon enough that assumptions in the military could be deadly. Kellerman continued firing with mechanical precision, each shot deliberate and controlled. Morrison found himself studying not just her accuracy, which was exceptional, But her breathing patterns, her trigger discipline, the way she handled transitions between targets, these weren't the skills of a typical naval aviator. These were the refined techniques of someone who'd lived and died by the rifle in places that didn't exist on any official map. "Where'd you learn to shoot like that, Captain?" Rodriguez asked during a reload break, his earlier skepticism replaced by grudging respect. "Here and there," Kellerman answered, checking her magazine with practiced efficiency. "You pick things up." Morrison felt that familiar tingle at the base of his skull, the same sensation he'd experienced in Syria when intelligence photos didn't match ground truth, or in Afghanistan when seemingly routine patrols turned into something else entirely. The woman beside him was performing flawlessly, but every instinct honed by decades of special operations was screaming that there was more to this story. "Mind if I take a look at that rifle?" Morrison asked as Kellerman finished her final string of fire. She handed over the weapon without hesitation, watching as Morrison examined the barrel and action. Everything was standard issue, nothing modified or special, which made her performance even more remarkable. "Clean weapon," Morrison noted. "Clean weapons save lives," Kellerman replied, and something in her tone made Morrison look up sharply. It was a phrase from the teams, something you didn't hear outside very specific military circles. Morrison's eyes narrowed slightly as he studied her face, looking for tells, for any sign of who she really was beneath the carefully maintained exterior. That's when she turned to retrieve her gear bag, and Morrison got his first clear look at the tattoo on her shoulder. Not just the design, which had frozen his blood earlier, but the details surrounding it. Numbers, coordinates, and a small symbol that made his mouth go dry. Operation Nightfall. A mission so classified that even thinking about it in the wrong place could end careers. A mission where the impossible had happened, where a single pilot had changed the course of a war that officially didn't exist. Morrison's hand moved unconsciously to his own chest again, to the matching tattoo that marked him as one of the few survivors of that night. He'd watched that pilot die. He'd seen the aircraft go down in flames over hostile territory, had called in the strike that obliterated everything within a 2-mile radius to prevent technology from falling into enemy hands. Yet here she stood, alive and breathing, as if the dead could simply walk back into the world of the living. The desert heat suddenly felt cold against Morrison's skin as the implications crashed over him like a tsunami. If Captain Lyra Kellerman was who he thought she was, then everything he'd believed about that night 7 years ago was wrong. Everything he'd been told, everything he'd reported, everything that had shaped his understanding of loss and sacrifice in the service of his country, all of it was a lie. He needed answers, and he needed them now. Morrison waited until the range had cleared before approaching Kellerman directly. She was methodically cleaning the borrowed rifle, her movements economical and precise. Up close, he could see faint scars along her hands and forearms, the kind that came from survival situations most people only read about in thriller novels. "Captain, I need to ask you something, and I need you to be straight with me," Morrison said, keeping his voice low and even. Kellerman looked up from the rifle, those sharp green eyes meeting his without wavering. "Shoot, Commander." September 15, 2018. Coordinates 36 degrees 4312, N 113 degrees 1015 E. Call sign Reaper 7. Does any of that ring a bell? For the first time since arriving at the range, Morrison saw something flicker across Kellerman's face. Not fear, not surprise, but something deeper, recognition mixed with pain that had been carefully buried but never fully healed. "That's a very specific question, Commander," she said carefully. "It requires a very specific answer." Kellerman set down the rifle and stood, her full attention now focused on Morrison with an intensity that made him feel like he was being dissected by a surgeon. She studied his face, his posture, the way he held himself, as if reading a classified document that could change the course of history. You were there, she said finally. It wasn't a question. I was the one who called in the airstrike, Morrison admitted. I watched your bird go down. I saw the explosion that should have killed everyone within 2 miles. A ghost of a smile played at the corners of Kellerman's mouth. Should have. That's the key phrase, isn't it, Commander? Morrison felt the world shift slightly on its axis. Every assumption, every report, every sleepless night spent wondering if he'd made the right call, all of it was suddenly up for grabs. How? He asked simply. Kellerman was quiet for a long moment, her gaze drifting toward the horizon where heat shimmer made the desert dance like liquid mercury. When she spoke, her voice carried the weight of secrets that had shaped nations. Sometimes, Commander, the mission requires you to become someone else entirely. Sometimes survival means letting everyone believe you're dead, including the people who watched you die. She turned back to face him, and Morrison saw something in her eyes that he recognized from his own mirror, the look of someone who'd sacrificed everything, including their own identity, for something larger than themselves. The question is, Kellerman continued, are you ready to learn what really happened that night? Because once you know, there's no going back. Some truths change everything. Morrison thought about his 2 decades of service, about the missions that had defined his career, about the friends he'd lost, and the enemies he'd defeated. He thought about the nightmares that still visited him sometimes, dreams of burning aircraft and impossible odds and decisions that saved thousands of lives at the cost of his own peace of mind. I've been ready for 7 years, he said. Kellerman nodded once as if she'd expected that answer. Then we need to talk, but not here. Too many ears, too many eyes. There's a place off base where we can speak freely. Morrison considered the wisdom of following a woman who'd officially been dead for 7 years to a location of her choosing. Every protocol in his extensive training screamed that this was dangerous, possibly stupid, and definitely against regulations. But those same instincts that had kept him alive through impossible situations were telling him something else entirely. They were telling him that Captain Lyra Ghost Kellerman might be the key to understanding not just what had happened that night in 2018, but what was still happening in conflicts that never made the evening news. The sun was reaching its zenith now, burning away the morning shadows and revealing the stark beauty of the Nevada desert. Somewhere in that vast expanse of sand and sage, Morrison was about to learn truths that would reshape everything he thought he knew about war, sacrifice, and the price of serving something greater than oneself. He looked at the woman standing before him, unremarkable in appearance, extraordinary in capability, carrying secrets that could topple governments or save nations, and made his choice. Lead the way, Captain, lead the way. The Dust Devil Diner sat 20 miles outside the wire, a ramshackle collection of weathered wood and corrugated metal that looked like it had been fighting the desert wind since the 1950s. Morrison followed Kellerman's battered Ford pickup down the 2-lane highway, his mind racing through possibilities and probabilities, each scenario more incredible than the last. Inside, the diner was exactly what Morrison expected: cracked vinyl booths, a counter that had seen better decades, and coffee that could strip paint. Kellerman chose a corner booth with clear sight lines to both entrances and the kitchen. Professional habits, Morrison noted, the kind that kept people alive in places where trust was a luxury few could afford. You want to know about Operation Nightfall, Kellerman said after the waitress, a weathered woman who looked like she'd been part of the diner's fixtures since opening day, had poured their coffee and disappeared back behind the counter. I want to know how someone survives a direct hit from a Hellfire missile, Morrison replied. Kellerman's laugh was short and bitter. You assume I was in the aircraft when your missile arrived. Morrison felt his carefully constructed understanding of that night begin to crumble. The thermal signature clearly showed. Showed what the thermal signature was designed to show, Kellerman interrupted. Commander, let me ask you something. In all your years in the teams, How many times have you encountered a situation where the intelligence was exactly what it appeared to be? Morrison thought about it. The honest answer was almost never. Intelligence was a puzzle made of fragments, assumptions, and carefully crafted deceptions. The enemy knew how to lie, and sometimes allies did too. "Walk me through it," Morrison said. Kellerman leaned back in the booth, her eyes focused on something beyond the diner's grease-stained windows. The mission brief said one thing: extract a high-value target from deep behind enemy lines, minimal footprint, maximum deniability. Standard Black Ops parameters. I remember, Asset was supposed to be an Iranian nuclear scientist ready to defect. That's what we were told. Kellerman's voice carried an edge that Morrison recognized, the tone of someone who discovered that their government's definition of truth was more flexible than advertised. Reality was something else entirely. Morrison waited. Patience was a virtue learned through countless hours of surveillance, of waiting for the perfect moment to strike. Sometimes the best intelligence came from simply letting people talk. The target wasn't a defecting scientist, Kellerman continued. It was a facility, a research station that officially didn't exist, conducting experiments that violated about 17 different international treaties. And the extraction wasn't about saving someone who wanted to come home. Morrison felt cold certainty settling in his stomach. It was about eliminating someone who knew too much. Bingo, Kellerman's smile held no humor. Someone had been feeding classified American technology to the Iranians for over 2 years. Someone high enough in the food chain to access information that should have been impossible to compromise. The facility was where they were reverse engineering our latest stealth technology. Morrison's mind raced through the implications. If American stealth capabilities had been compromised at the source, if enemies had gained access to technologies that represented decades of research and billions of dollars. The asset was the traitor, he said. Former Navy Captain Rebecca Sterling, 20-year veteran, spotless record, 2-tour in Afghanistan, decorated hero, also the architect of the biggest intelligence disaster in modern military history. Kellerman's voice was flat, emotionless. She was selling state secrets to fund research into advanced propulsion systems, research that would have given Iran technological superiority in aerospace development. Morrison absorbed this information, fitting it into the puzzle of that night. So the mission was assassination, not extraction. The mission was justice, Kellerman corrected, but not the kind they could put in an official report. Sterling had to disappear, along with every piece of evidence that she'd ever existed. The facility had to be destroyed, and it had to look like an accident or enemy action. The coffee in Morrison's cup had gone cold while he processed the magnitude of what Kellerman was telling him. You were supposed to eliminate her and destroy the facility. I was supposed to get close enough to plant charges that would level the entire complex, make it look like an internal explosion, maybe a failed experiment, plausible deniability all around. Kellerman finally met his eyes again, but Sterling was expecting me. Morrison felt pieces clicking into place. She knew you were coming. She knew everything. My call sign, my approach vector, even the specific weapons package I was carrying. Someone had fed her intelligence about the mission. Kellerman's hands tightened around her coffee cup. When I arrived at the target coordinates, I found myself flying into a trap that should have been impossible to set. The waitress approached their table, coffee pot in hand, but Morrison waved her away with a gesture that brooked no argument. This conversation was too important, too classified, and too dangerous to risk interruption. What kind of trap? Morrison asked. The kind that uses American technology against American pilots, Kellerman replied. Sterling had been working on more than just propulsion systems. She'd been developing next-generation surface-to-air missiles using our own guidance systems. When I came in for the attack run, I found myself being tracked by weapons that knew exactly how to counter every evasive maneuver in my repertoire. Morrison's blood ran cold. The implications were staggering. If enemies had gained access to not just American stealth technology, but also to the specific countermeasures designed to defeat American tactics. How did you survive? Kellerman was quiet for a long moment, her gaze once again drifting toward the horizon. When she spoke, her voice carried the weight of decisions that had shaped the course of history. By becoming someone else entirely. Morrison waited for elaboration, but Kellerman seemed lost in memories that were too complex, too painful, or too classified to share easily. The silence stretched between them like a wire under tension, ready to snap at the first wrong word. Finally, Morrison broke the quiet. The explosion, the thermal signature, my airstrike. All part of the plan, Kellerman said, just not the plan you were briefed on. Morrison felt the ground shifting beneath him again. Whose plan? The kind of plan you develop when you realize that the mission parameters have changed, when the enemy knows you're coming, and when going home isn't an option. Kellerman's smile was sharp as a blade. The kind of plan that requires you to die in order to complete the mission. The implications hit Morrison like a physical blow. If Kellerman had faked her own death, if the thermal signature had been manufactured, if the explosion had been planned. "You let me kill you," he said. "I let you save my life," Kellerman corrected. "Your airstrike wasn't the end of my mission, Commander. It was the beginning of something else entirely." Morrison stared at the woman across from him, trying to reconcile what he was hearing with what he thought he knew about military operations, about loyalty, about the price of serving your country. The woman who died in flames 7 years ago was sitting in a Nevada diner, telling him that everything he'd believed about that night was carefully constructed fiction. "What happened after the explosion?" Morrison asked. Kellerman's expression grew distant again. After the explosion, Captain Lyra Kellerman ceased to exist. What remained was something else. Someone else. Someone who could move through the world without leaving tracks, without creating ripples in intelligence networks, without triggering the sensors that monitor people who officially exist. Morrison thought he was beginning to understand. "You became a ghost." "I became the ghost. The kind of asset that appears when conventional military operations aren't enough, when the situation requires someone who can operate beyond the normal constraints of rank, protocol, and national boundaries." Kellerman met his eyes. "Someone who could hunt down every person involved in selling American secrets to our enemies and eliminate them without creating international incidents." The coffee shop suddenly felt very small, very isolated, and very far from the civilized world where wars were fought according to rules and oversight committees monitored operations for legal compliance. Morrison realized he was sitting across from someone who operated in the spaces between official policy and national necessity. "How many?" Morrison asked. "How many what? How many people were involved in the Sterling network? How many did you eliminate?" Kellerman was quiet for so long that Morrison wondered if she was going to answer. When she finally spoke, her voice was barely above a whisper. 17. Over the course of 6 years across 4 continents. Military officers, civilian contractors, foreign intelligence operatives, and arms dealers. All of them linked to the theft and sale of classified American technology. Morrison felt something cold settle in his chest. 17 people. 17 eliminations that would never appear in any official record, carried out by someone who didn't exist, in service of a mission that officially never happened. And Sterling. Sterling was the first. Kellerman's voice carried no emotion, no satisfaction, no regret. "I found her 3 months after my official death, living under a new identity in Montenegro. She'd taken $8 million in cryptocurrency and thought she was untouchable." Morrison could imagine the rest. A woman who'd betrayed her country, living in comfort on the proceeds of that betrayal, probably believing that she'd outsmarted the system that had created her. Then one day, a ghost from her past had appeared to collect a debt that could never be repaid with money. The facility, destroyed 6 hours after your airstrike, along with every piece of research Sterling had helped them develop, made it look like a secondary explosion from your initial attack. Kellerman's smile was grim. Sometimes the best cover story is the simplest one. Morrison was beginning to understand the scope of what he'd been part of that night. Not just a mission, but the beginning of a multi-year campaign to eliminate a network of traders and recover stolen technology. A campaign that had required the death of one person and the birth of another. "Why are you telling me this?" Morrison asked. "Why now after 7 years of silence?" Kellerman's expression grew serious. "Because the network wasn't completely eliminated. Because there are still people out there who have access to classified American technology, who are selling that access to the highest bidder. And because the situation has evolved beyond what one ghost can handle alone." Morrison felt his pulse quicken. "You need help." "I need someone with your particular skill set, someone who was there that night, someone who understands the stakes." Kellerman leaned forward. "Someone who can help me finish what we started 7 years ago." Outside, the desert wind was picking up, sending dust devils dancing across the highway like ghosts made visible. Morrison stared at the woman across from him, trying to process the magnitude of what she was asking. To join her would mean stepping into a world where official oversight didn't exist, where actions were justified by results rather than regulations, where the price of failure was measured in national security disasters rather than career setbacks. It would mean becoming a ghost himself. "What's the mission?" Morrison asked. Kellerman's smile carried the weight of secrets that could reshape the global balance of power. "The mission, Commander, is to prevent the next war before it starts, and it begins tonight." The motel room 20 miles further into the desert looked like every other roadside accommodation Morrison had seen in his travels. Thin walls, thinner mattresses, and the kind of anonymity that cash transactions could buy. But Kellerman had transformed the space into something resembling a tactical operations center. Maps covered the walls, satellite photos were spread across the small table, and a secure laptop displayed information that made Morrison's security clearance feel inadequate. "This is Vladimir Petrov," Kellerman said, pointing to a photograph of a middle-aged man with sharp Slavic features and eyes that suggested both intelligence and ruthlessness. "Former Spetsnaz, current freelance arms dealer, and the new head of what remains of the Sterling network." Morrison studied the image. "Russian. Ukrainian, actually, though his loyalties shift with the financial winds. He's been quiet for the past 18 months, which usually means he's planning something significant." Kellerman pulled up another photograph, this one showing Petrov at what appeared to be an upscale restaurant. 3 weeks ago, he surfaced in Dubai, meeting with representatives from 4 different intelligence services. Morrison felt familiar tension building in his shoulders, the kind that preceded complex operations with multiple variables and high stakes. "What's he selling?" "Something that shouldn't exist." Kellerman's expression grew grim. "Remember the stealth technology Sterling helped the Iranians access. Petrov has been developing it further, combining American innovations with Russian engineering and Chinese manufacturing capabilities." Morrison absorbed this information. The implications were staggering. If enemies had developed next-generation stealth capabilities using American technology as a foundation. "What kind of platform?" Kellerman clicked to the next image, and Morrison felt his blood freeze. The photograph showed what appeared to be a fighter aircraft, but the design was unlike anything he'd seen in his decades of military service. The lines were too clean, the angles too perfect, the overall configuration suggesting capabilities that bordered on science fiction. "Meet the Shadow Falcon," Kellerman said. "Radar cross-section smaller than a Sparrow, speed capabilities approaching Mach 4, and weapons systems that can engage targets beyond the range of any current air defense network. Morrison studied the photograph more carefully. The aircraft's design incorporated elements he recognized from classified American projects, combined with innovations that were clearly from other sources. How many? Intelligence suggests 12 prototypes have been completed, with production capabilities for at least 50 more. Kellerman's voice carried the weight of someone delivering news that could change the course of history, and they're being offered to the highest bidder. Morrison thought about the implications. 50 advanced stealth fighters in the hands of hostile nations could shift the global balance of power overnight. Traditional air superiority, the foundation of American military doctrine for decades, would become meaningless. Where's the production facility? That's what we need to find out. Kellerman pulled up a map showing the Middle East, North Africa, and parts of Asia. Petrov has been careful to compartmentalize his operation. Components are manufactured in different locations, assembly happens elsewhere, and testing is conducted in yet another country. Morrison studied the map, his mind automatically identifying potential sites based on infrastructure requirements, political stability, and proximity to transportation networks. You have any leads? 3 possibilities. Kellerman marked locations on the map. A facility in Kazakhstan that's been expanding its aerospace manufacturing capabilities. A complex in Sudan that satellite imagery suggests is larger than official reports indicate. And a site in Myanmar that's supposedly producing agricultural equipment but has runway space capable of handling large aircraft. Morrison considered the options. Each location presented unique challenges in terms of access, intelligence gathering, and potential elimination operations. What's the timeline? 48 hours. Kellerman's response hit Morrison like a physical blow. Intelligence indicates that Petrov is planning to demonstrate the Shadow Falcon's capabilities to potential buyers. Once that happens, we lose any chance of preventing the technology from proliferating. Morrison felt the familiar rush of pre-mission adrenaline mixing with the cold calculation that had kept him alive through decades of dangerous operations. 48 hours to identify, infiltrate, and eliminate a production facility that could reshape global military capabilities. It was the kind of mission that required perfect intelligence, flawless execution, and a willingness to operate beyond the normal constraints of international law. It was exactly the kind of impossible task that had defined his career. "What assets do we have?" Morrison asked. Kellerman's smile was sharp. "We have surprise, we have motivation, and we have the fact that everyone thinks I'm dead." She paused. "We also have this." She opened a briefcase that had been sitting unnoticed in the corner of the room. Inside, nestled in custom foam padding, was equipment that Morrison recognized, but had never expected to see outside the most classified military installations. Advanced surveillance gear, communications equipment that could penetrate any security system, and weapons that officially didn't exist. "Where did you get this?" Morrison asked. 7 years of operating as a ghost gives you access to interesting supply chains, Kellerman replied. "Some of it's borrowed, some of it's liberated, and some of it's been developed specifically for this kind of operation." Morrison examined a device that looked like a standard tablet but clearly incorporated technology far beyond anything commercially available. "This is quantum encrypted, satellite linked, and capable of penetrating any firewall currently in existence," Kellerman finished. "It's also equipped with surveillance capabilities that can map a facility's interior layout from external observation points." Morrison was beginning to understand the scope of what Kellerman had been building during her years as a ghost. Not just a one-person elimination operation, but a comprehensive intelligence and action network capable of addressing threats that conventional military forces couldn't touch. "The mission parameters?" Morrison asked. "Identify the primary production facility, eliminate all Shadow Falcon prototypes, destroy manufacturing capabilities, and prevent the technology from reaching hostile buyers. Kellerman's voice was matter-of-fact, as if she were discussing weekend plans rather than an operation that could prevent the next global conflict. Secondary objective is to eliminate Petrov and recover any intelligence about remaining network operatives. Morrison nodded. The parameters were clear, the stakes were obvious, and the timeline was impossible. In other words, it was exactly the kind of mission that had defined the best and worst moments of his military career. Transportation. I've got access to a modified aircraft that can get us anywhere in the world without appearing on official flight manifests, Kellerman replied. Fast, stealthy, and equipped with capabilities that will make infiltration and extraction possible even in heavily defended airspace. Morrison felt pieces clicking into place. The woman across from him hadn't just survived her official death, she'd used the freedom that death provided to build something extraordinary. A capability that existed outside normal military and intelligence structures, answerable only to the mission and constrained only by the requirements of success. It was dangerous, it was probably illegal, and it was exactly what the situation required. "When do we leave?" Morrison asked. Kellerman checked her watch. 6 hours. That gives us time to review intelligence, plan approach vectors, and prepare equipment. She met his eyes. It also gives you time to change your mind. Once we're airborne, there's no going back. No official support, no extraction guarantees, no diplomatic immunity if things go sideways. Morrison thought about his 23 years of service, about the missions that had shaped his understanding of duty and sacrifice. He thought about the oath he'd taken to defend his country against all enemies, foreign and domestic. He thought about the price of allowing advanced military technology to fall into hostile hands. Most of all, he thought about the woman sitting across from him, a pilot who'd given up her identity, her official existence, even her name in service of something larger than herself. Someone who'd spent 7 years operating in the shadows to protect a nation that believed she was dead. "I'm in," Morrison said. Kellerman nodded once, as if she'd expected that answer. "Then let's get to work, Commander. We have a war to prevent." Outside, the desert night was settling over Nevada like a blanket, hiding secrets and sheltering ghosts who moved through the darkness in service of causes that could never be officially acknowledged. In a few hours, Morrison would step into that darkness himself, trading the security of his official existence for the uncertainty of a mission that could save or damn them all. The transition felt like coming home. The aircraft hangar was hidden in plain sight, another anonymous metal building in an industrial complex outside Las Vegas, where dozens of aerospace contractors maintained facilities that could have contained anything from experimental drones to commercial satellite components. But Morrison's trained eye immediately recognized defensive modifications, sophisticated security systems, and the kind of infrastructure that suggested this was far more than a simple storage facility. Kellerman led him through a series of security checkpoints that would have impressed the Pentagon, each layer requiring biometric authentication that confirmed she had access to resources and technologies that officially didn't exist. The final door opened onto a space that made Morrison's breath catch in his throat. The aircraft was beautiful in the way that only perfect engineering could achieve, sleek lines that seemed to flow like liquid metal, surfaces that appeared to absorb light rather than reflect it, and proportions that suggested capabilities far beyond anything Morrison had encountered in his military career. It was clearly designed for stealth, speed, and long-range operations, but the overall configuration was unlike any platform he'd seen in classified briefings or intelligence reports. "Meet the Phantom," Kellerman said, running her hand along the aircraft's wing with obvious affection. "Custom-built for operations that require getting in and out of places where conventional aircraft would be detected, intercepted, or shot down." Morrison walked around the aircraft, his professional eye cataloging details that spoke of advanced engineering and unlimited budgets. Whose design? Mine, Kellerman replied simply. 7 years of operating as a ghost gives you unique insights into what kind of platform you actually need for this work. No committee compromises, no bureaucratic requirements, no accounting for political considerations. Just pure function designed around mission requirements. Morrison could see the results of that focused approach. Everything about the Phantom spoke of optimization for a specific purpose, getting small teams into heavily defended areas and back out again without being detected. It was the kind of aircraft that special operations forces dreamed about but never expected to see outside of fantasy novels. Performance specifications. Range, 4,000 nautical miles without refueling. Speed, Mach 3.2 at altitude, subsonic for stealth penetration. Radar cross-section smaller than a large bird. Electronic warfare capabilities that can spoof or disable most current air defense systems. Kellerman's voice carried quiet pride. And weapon systems sufficient for precision strikes against hardened targets. Morrison absorbed this information while continuing his inspection of the aircraft. The engineering was flawless, but the implications were staggering. Kellerman hadn't just faked her death and assumed a new identity. She'd built an entirely new kind of military capability from scratch. Who else knows about this? The people who need to know, Kellerman replied. A very small network of individuals who understand that sometimes national security requires capabilities that exist outside official channels. Morrison thought about the implications. An aircraft this advanced, with these capabilities, operating completely outside military command structures and congressional oversight. It represented either the ultimate expression of American ingenuity and determination, or the most dangerous development in modern military history. Possibly both. Flight time to target areas, Morrison asked. Kazakhstan, 6 hours. Sudan, 8 hours. Myanmar, 10 hours. Kellerman was already moving toward the aircraft, her movements suggesting someone eager to return to her natural element. But we're not going to any of those locations first. Morrison felt his eyebrows raise. No. First, we're going to Dubai. Petrov is still there, meeting with potential buyers. If we can get close enough to intercept his communications, we might be able to identify the production facility without having to search 3 countries. Morrison nodded. The approach made tactical sense. Gather intelligence first, then strike with precision rather than conducting multiple complex operations against potentially empty targets. What's our cover? Wealthy private military contractors interested in acquiring advanced aircraft for security operations, Kellerman replied, handing Morrison a tablet containing detailed background information. Your identity is established, your credentials are verified, and your reputation suggests exactly the kind of client Petrov would want to meet. Morrison scanned the information on the tablet. The identity was perfect, successful enough to have access to serious money, connected enough to know about advanced military technologies, and discreet enough to participate in transactions that existed in the gray areas of international law. How long to establish this? It's been in place for 3 years, Kellerman replied. Building credible identities takes time, especially ones that will survive scrutiny from professionals who make their living identifying deception. Morrison was beginning to understand the scope of Kellerman's 7-year project, not just eliminating immediate threats,